Hello, my name is Barbara Doyle, and I'm a special education professional with over 45 years of experience. I'm also a family member of children and adults with disabilities. This video explores the development of mental health in young children. Mental health is important for lifetime success. Our mental health affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act. It helps determine how we handle stress, how we make choices, and how we relate to others. We know that mental health is promoted or damaged as we interact and communicate with others in our world. This is true regardless of any learning problems, developmental issues, or diagnoses. In this video, learn what kinds of interactions promote mental health and what might harm the mental health of young children. Learn practical strategies so you can promote mental health every day. Things that support mental health in adults will likely support mental health in children. Things that support mental health in people without disabilities will likely support mental health in people with disabilities. So what is mental health? Mentalhealth.gov defines mental health in this way. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, how we relate to others, and make our choices. Remember that mental health is not just the absence of a mental disorder or of mental illness. Mental health is a state of well-being in which every person realizes their potential. Mental health allows us to cope with the normal stresses of everyday life and to work productively and fruitfully. People who have good mental health skills are able to make a contribution to his or her community. For mental health, a sense of social connectedness is vital. So what promotes mental health in young children? Let's talk about things that we can do to promote the mental health of our young children. The first thing we can do is assume competence. Assume that the child is listening. Assume that the child is in there, that this is a whole child. No matter what diagnoses the child might have, or no matter what special learning issues the child might experience. When we assume competence, we become much more careful about what we say in front of children. And we stop talking about them in front of them as if they're not even there. Young children need to feel safe. They need to feel that no harm will come to them in their environment, and that the people around them will not harm their body, will not harm their mind, or harm their personality. So feeling safe and creating an environment in which children feel safe promotes mental health. Mental health is promoted in young children when children feel like the people around them are trying to help them be a better person. Not just trying to make them mind or accomplish a certain task, but to grow into the best person that they can be. Mental health is promoted in young children when children know that if they need help, they will get help. That someone will always help me when I need help. I'm not alone and I'm not afraid because I always have someone who can help me. But what happens when kids ask us for help? A lot of times we want them to demonstrate their skills. So when they ask for help, we might say something like, "You can do that yourself. I've seen you do that before. I know you can do this. Be independent. You don't need help right now." Unfortunately, although we're used to saying those kinds of things, that may not be the best way to teach the skill of asking for and getting help when you need it. So when a child asks for help, even if you don't think they really need it, go to them and be ready to provide help. Maybe the help is just your presence to give them the confidence to be able to move forward and to do the thing that they are asking help about. Always be present to provide help when a child needs it. Remember that social connectedness is essential for mental health, and that children need to know that they are connected to others. They need to know who loves them. They need to know who likes them. They need to know who misses them when they're not there. And there are many ways we can promote social connectedness for children with disabilities, even if they can't talk, and even if they seem like they're not paying attention to other people.
As you can see, promoting mental health in all young children is important. Now let's listen to how the staff at the Summit School in Elgin apply these strategies in a preschool setting.
We like to assume competence in young children by having very high expectations for them. We will help them work through situations, and then we will step back to see how they have actually learned and can handle a situation on their own. And we step in it as needed, but we really have these expectations that children will learn how to handle any type of situation at this young age. By learning it at a young age, then that can carry over as they get a little bit older, and they've got the tools that they need that we provide for them to help them when they get into the older grades. We like to nurture the children here. We want them to feel safe. We want them to feel that this is an environment that provides safety, caring, nurturing for them. When children feel safe in their environment, then they feel safe to learn. They can focus more on their learning and their skills that they need rather than on, am I going to be taken care of? Well, it's very important to promote social emotional needs in children, because children that feel safe and secure in their environment can now focus on their learning. Children that have been helped to understand what their feelings are will now have a tool to help them recognize when they're feeling that way. And when we give children tools on ways to handle all of these different types of feelings, we give children tools on how to be polite to their peers, how to have that social piece that will help them get along as they get older. And it's giving them that safety and that security that their environment will be a safe place for them.
Social connectiveness is critically important for students in a learning environment. It's the culture of the building. It is where a child can come through the door and be greeted. We have staff out at the buses. Some of our children take taxis to school. Their staff are out there saying, good morning, how are you? And they're checking where this child is. Are they good? Are they ready to come into the building and get about the business of learning? Or have they had a rough night, or have they had a rough morning? We want to be connected. What do you need this morning? And we focus on the needs of the student.
I think it's really important for children at this age to get that social emotional connection with other children. Society's changing, families are changing. You don't have as much, the kids may not have as much contact with other children, so they may not know how to behave with other children. They might come from a very small family, they might not know how to share. Maybe they've never held a book before. They don't know how to turn the pages. So that's why we're here. We're here to help them understand how to interact with their materials around them, how to interact with the children around them, how to interact with the teachers, get what they need from the grown-ups when they need it in a positive way.
So let's switch our focus now and talk about what could possibly harm the mental health of young children. Talking about children in front of them as if they are not there is very harmful. Sometimes it seems like it's necessary. Perhaps you're coming out of therapy and a therapist wants to tell the parent how the child did in the session. Rather than say, this is how Joey did, include the child in the conversation and say, Joey, let's tell your mom how you did today. And that way Joey is connected to the social situation and not an outsider that people are talking about. Mental health can be harmed by using fear and threats and shame and humiliation and guilt to try to change the behavior of a young child. Many of us were raised with these kinds of things. We were threatened, we were shamed or humiliated, we were made to feel guilty, and maybe that was the best that everybody knew and could do at the time. But it's not productive to develop the mental health of young children with disabilities when you use these kinds of strategies. One thing that's harmful for mental health, as we talked about, is feeling alone or like there's no help. Something we do that can harm mental health is telling children to solve their own problems, mind their own business, do it by themselves. There are times where maybe the child doesn't really need our help, but that we want to provide it just because they asked for it, so that they know it's always present. And sometimes we tell children to handle their own issues and handle what they're doing with other children when they really don't have the skills to do it. So to promote mental health, always be willing to step up and step in and be present with the child rather than expecting them to handle their own issues. Something that's very harmful for mental health, and there's a lot of research about this, is being bullied. Being bullied by other children or being bullied by adults who are intimidating the child to try to get them to behave in a certain way. When somebody is bullied, they can feel very disconnected from everyone else. They can feel full of shame and also full of anger. So we need to identify anywhere in the child's life where somebody is bullying or intimidating them and change that, or else over time that'll have a very detrimental effect on their mental health. Being secluded when you've made a mistake, or being restrained or confined, is very bad for mental health, especially for young children. When we exclude children because they've behaved badly, we lose the opportunity to teach them a new behavior that they can use right in that situation. We also promote social isolation, which is not good for anybody's mental health. There are 3 important mental health skills that we need to teach all children. And remember to begin to teach these skills as early as possible. There's nothing to wait for when you're trying to develop mental health skills. The first one is called self-awareness. And self-awareness is the ability to identify and respond to your own state of mind, your own condition of your body, your mood and behavior, and how aroused you are. Are you super excited? Are you very low energy? Self-awareness is important because later on you're going to have to be able to figure out how you feel, know the name of it, and be able to tell that to somebody else or meet your need in some way. Sometimes we'll say to children, "Oh, you're not hurt, you're fine," because we don't want them to be upset or cry. But the truth is, whenever they are feeling any kind of physical sensation, we need to name it, talk about it, and relate to the child while they're experiencing it. And self-awareness leads to self-knowledge, the knowledge of what you need, what you don't need, what you can tolerate and not tolerate, and what others need to do to help you. So for example, if there's a certain sound that occurs and you cannot tolerate that sound, you need to know that and you need to know what to do about that. In that case, you might cover your ears, or you might teach the child to step out in the hall when that sound occurs. But you will teach him a response based on his knowledge of himself. This is also when we teach children how to tell other people what they need. Please stand back, move, don't touch me. These are instructions that even very young children need to learn to give verbally or non-verbally to others, based on their own awareness and self-knowledge. Self-advocacy is a third important skill to teach children. This is the ability to have constructive, positive, not dangerous ways to meet your own needs by either letting others know what you need, telling others what you need, asking others to change what they're doing in order for you to get needed supports. Now, in very young children with special needs, we might teach this both verbally and non-verbally. We might use a stop card, not only to tell the child when to stop, but when the child can tell others when they need for you to stop. With self-awareness, self-knowledge, and self-advocacy, you can grow into a very successful person and have that social connectedness that is so essential for mental health.
Self-awareness, self-knowledge, and self-advocacy are all essential skills to teach children that can have a lasting positive impact on mental health. But how can families and teachers support these skills? Let's go back to the Summit School staff to hear what strategies they have found to be successful.
As far as self-awareness, we want them to understand how they feel before they can understand another child's feelings. So we talk about, how do you feel when somebody takes your toy? Or how do you feel when somebody helps you? Or we have an emotions poster that we have posted as well. And the kids like to point to it and say, I felt like this when I came in. So they have some way of labeling. That's the first step. As far as self-advocacy goes, I really like when the kids are able to tell what they need or explain a story, or, so that they're communicating. It's a higher level communication skill. And one thing that we talk about a lot too is if somebody wants you to share a toy, we let the kids know it's okay to say no. And this is a big deal because a lot of times it's just, oh, I have to give it to you, and they get all sad. So no, you can use other words. What can you do that will make you feel comfortable? So they can say, not right now, when I'm done, you can have a turn when I'm finished, all those things, so that child doing the requesting, oh, okay, I just have to wait for a turn. And then the other child doesn't have to feel obligated to hand it over. So it's okay to say no. It is fine to say no in class.
I like to give them scenario-based questions. A lot of them have to do with a story I'm reading. I like to ask them, well, how do you think the friend in the story is feeling? Well, what's a time that you might feel that way? So we really like to connect their feelings and their emotions to the content in the story, to the content in different situations. We like to do a lot of talking with social and emotional problem-solving tactics. How are you feeling right now? How did they make you feel? What's another time that you felt that way? So we really like them to take on their emotions, become their own advocate, be self-aware.
One of the relaxation techniques that we use is yoga. We use that strategy because competition does not bode well for children who have poor emotional health. They need to learn more about themselves and how they can cope with different opportunities before they interact well with each other. So one of the strategies we use is to teach them how to breathe deeply, how to regulate themselves so that they can process different emotions and how they can process challenges. When they're very young, we teach children to recognize different emotions by pictures. And they can see an angry picture, they can see a happy picture, and when they see that, they learn to identify it. When they are having a difficult time in the classroom, rather than taking a punitive step, our staff here looks at helping them process the various emotions and regulate and self-regulate. One of the other strategies that we use is mindfulness at Summit. That mindfulness is, once again, having them be aware, self-aware, and the more self-aware you become, the more socially competent you become.
So let's talk for a minute about a few things we should stop doing. Stop talking about children in front of them as if they're not there. Temple Grandin, a very famous woman with autism, once told me that when people talked about her when she was a child in front of her as if she was not there, she would have a full-blown panic attack and feel like maybe she had disappeared. It's not good for mental health to have other people talk about you as if they're discussing an object or as if they're discussing somebody who's not even present. Certainly, we should stop telling everyone in the child's world about all the problems the child has, about the problems they create for the family, about the problems they create financially, about how worried the adults are about the child. Not only should we stop doing that in front of the child, but we should stop doing that in general. Now, of course, parents need emotional support, and they need to have people they can talk to about how difficult this is and the challenges they face every day. But that should not be everyone who comes in contact with the child. Stop using comparisons. Oh, your brother does this better than you do, or your sister does this better than you do. Stop sharing private information with people who really don't need to know it. These kinds of things should not be used as tools to try to change children's behavior. Now remember, we're assuming competence. We're assuming there's a child in there and that there's more going on in their hearts and minds than they can ever possibly tell us. We're assuming that they're listening. Now, if they're listening, think of all the things they've already heard about themselves. They've heard about every deficit they've had. They've heard about every disability they have. They've heard about every poor behavior they showed us. They've heard about everything wrong that ever happened. How are we going to combat that? If that's all they ever hear, their mental health will truly be damaged. So what we want to do is create positive affirmations and say them to the child every day. A positive affirmation might be, I can learn. It might be, I've learned many things. And if children don't know the difference between I and me, then you might use their name. You might say, people love Ryan. And then you can list all the people, and you can make a sign and put it up in the kitchen. Look at all the people who love Ryan. Look at all the people who want to help Ryan. You could have another list of all the things that Ryan has learned and all the ways he makes us proud. And in that way, those positive statements help to combat all the negative things that children have heard about themselves. Another important skill for the adults in the child's world to develop is not paying so much attention to how a child is sending a message to us, but trying to listen to the message. So perhaps the child is screaming to send a message. Well, rather than focus on the fact that the child is screaming, stop, take a breath, and think about what is it he's trying to tell me. Is he trying to tell me he's overwhelmed? Is she trying to tell me she's overstimulated? Is she trying to tell me she's afraid or that she needs more help? So think about the message the child is sending as opposed to the way the child is sending it. We want the children around the child with special needs to tell us everything, because they might be able to tell us when the child is frightened or when someone's bullying them or intimidating them. So we want children to tell. Now, certainly they're going to tell you things you don't care about. They might say, Patrick sharpened his pencil when he wasn't supposed to, and we would just say, thank you for telling me. But they might also say, Rachel's being really mean to Emily. And in that case, we need to stop and say, thank you for telling me, and do something about it. Something we should start doing is be as kind and empathetic as you possibly can to the child. It is not easy to be a child with special needs. They have to sort through so much information. Life is very confusing and stressful for them. I always ask people, has anybody ever been too kind to you? Has anybody ever been too nice to you? Almost all the time the answer is no. So when someone's having a hard time, rather than think about trying to make them do what you wish they were doing, think about how to support their mental health in that moment. And kindness and love and empathy are 3 ways that you can support the development of mental health even when kids aren't doing what they're supposed to do. Something else we need to do is to recognize the profile of a child who has mental health needs that are not being met. If a child is almost always angry or very frequently sad or afraid of almost everything, we need to bring that to the attention of professionally trained people, because the earlier you address mental health issues, the better. Do not wait. We can change those kinds of situations if we address them early, if we study the child and find out what's going on and develop strategies for the adults around the child to use. Another strategy that will promote mental health in young children is to document events that were traumatic to the child. Perhaps something happened that wasn't traumatic to other people in the household, but the child was very, very upset about it. Be sure to write that down and keep a file of anything that was particularly upsetting to the child, including as many details about the event as you can. If the child has a mental health issue later on, we may be able to use that information to support them. So here are the ideas of promoting mental health in children. And now you have some new strategies of things to start doing and to stop doing. Promoting the mental health of young children is a job for all of us and for all the children in our world.